So I had something come up with a client recently, and he contacted me and was asking about my perspective on what could be potential blockages or resistance or things that are preventing him from attaining this goal of his, which is around obtaining funding. So he has a lot of experience in funding multiple projects, business projects, and has had pretty good success. But most recently, in the last like year to 2 years, he's found challenges with these deals going through, and in his words, it seems to be very legitimate reasons of like the underwriter kind of sabotaging them, or an attorney getting sick, or someone being in a car accident, right? Like external things that seem
Sure.
to kind of sabotage the deals. But in his experience in doing this work, he also believes that, well, maybe there's something more to this. Maybe there's a deeper reason. Is it an energetic reason? And is it something inside of him that's preventing this movement forward? And so I wanted to talk about, how that resistance kind of shows up and what could be potential, reasons for that. And so without going into too much detail, preserving some confidentiality for the client, he had actually sent me his model of the world, and comes from a background that was, not very wealthy, right? His family of origin, his parents kind of struggled financially, um, and himself actually going through various periods of times, struggling financially, whether it's getting fired from a job or again, trouble getting funding or things like that. And so I guess I'm trying to think of the right question for you, what's your perspective on how these things kind of show up in our lives and create these challenges or this almost resistance to movement forward? Is that making sense?
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I always look at it from a broader perspective, right? Of it's really easy to get trapped in, oh, this is resistance, right? Not the fact that like maybe those deals shouldn't go through, or maybe you don't
Hmm.
have the skills for them, or
Yeah.
there's a whole bunch of other areas to look at. But the main the main ones I look at are, do you it, what does this mean, right? So like
Hmm.
when you look at what he's doing right now, you said family of origin, maybe like more of a poor money mindset type thing. Like, did he build himself up to a level and now he's kind of stuck at this level, and that these deals would bring him to another level, but he's falling back? Or is he backsliding? Or like that would be my first question, right? Like,
Yeah.
is this an identity issue where the current view of who he thinks he is, the surrounding circumstances are starting to not match it? Like they're starting
Hmm.
to pull outside. It's like when someone loses weight, they start losing a bunch of weight and they feel great, but their internal, identity is like, oh, I'm not a thin person. I'm not an athletic person. And they
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
start backsliding. So that'd be my
Yeah.
first question.
Yeah. I think that's a great question. And, you know, just to take a step back again, like my perspective on it, like we could have a great philosophical debate on all of these reasons why, and we could find certain things that could be, yeah, energetic resistance to change or family of origin software, mental software programming reasons why. Um, I happen to believe there's more, I guess, synchronistic or energetic metaphysical reasons for why these things show up in our life. But at the end of the day, none of that actually matters, really. Like our perspective on like if it's metaphysical or not, because to your point, really what it comes down to is what does this mean? Now, if your current software or the meaning you're creating around it is there's something wrong with me, or
Sure.
there's something, yeah, that this isn't supposed to happen for some reason, or the universe, the world is out to get me. Well, that's not a very empowering thing for movement forward. Or
Right.
it could be, what am I supposed to learn from this? Or yeah, to your point, like, what if these deals aren't supposed to happen? Why? What would be the benefit of, the universe not allowing this to happen? Or, hey, maybe I need to, um, draft these proposals better. Maybe I didn't do a good enough job creating these deals. I need to go back to the drawing board, right? So
Right.
like those become, I think, more empowering questions and meanings that you can create from it, right? And we talk about this almost every time. It's the I choose meaning tool.
Right.
Like it's not that these storms that the universe gives us, these challenges, these things are creates the reality. They're just data points. It's the aftermath of the storm. It's what we do with the data points. It's the meaning that we assign to it that has the most value for us and moving forward.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you know, everyone likes to boil things down to like a really clear, clean cut. This is it. This is the reason, or
Yeah,
whether it's an excuse like, oh, Mercury's in retrograde, so this is why I can't get my life together. And that's like, sure, maybe.
yeah,
Um, and also like, okay, it's gonna be, a handful of times a year. So like, what are you gonna do about it? Right? Like, just
yeah,
like, oh, well, it's raining outside. I can't go for a run. It's like, no, just because it's raining doesn't mean you can't go for a run. It just means you might have to be a little bit more creative about how you go about it.
yeah,
Or in the concept of resistance, right? We can dive deeper into that because
yeah,
I do think in all of these scenarios, resistance is a very real force that you experience, and
yeah,
it's something that can still shade whatever uh, or tint whatever
yeah,
decisions you make. So it
yeah,
could be one of those like, oh well, it's raining outside, right? But if you have resistance against running to begin with, right? Like I don't like running, I hate running, running sucks, right? Like,
yeah,
well, now you're gonna be like, oh, see, this is why, and that's more of a resistance thing, versus if you are someone who actually enjoys running but is, you know, likes to be a fair weather runner, like it won't be resistance. It's more like it's an obstacle, but it's an obstacle you're okay with overcoming, or maybe you begrudgingly overcome it,
yeah,
but that resistance isn't the same kind of resistance as like the subconscious resistance, if that makes
right.
sense.
Yeah, yeah, it's absolutely making sense. And to dive into the deep end or get some metaphysical with this for a little bit, because I said I do believe that these things they do tend to show up in ways that seem external or like that we don't have control over it, but there's reasons why based on our current level of consciousness. So, like, if we want to move forward, or we think we want to move forward, but our subconscious really doesn't, well, things can show up as resistance. Or what was the example you gave me of that author, and how resistance shows up as what was it, ways for the universe to test you, or who was the author again?
Yeah, it was Stephen Pressfield,
Yeah,
and he talks about the capital R resistance as
yeah,
like a force, and it's interesting because if you look throughout, let's say history or spiritual history, religious history, like the concept of Satan came from the term of Hasatan,
uh,
which meant the opponent,
okay,
right? So it's
yeah,
like it's the opponent, it's the opposing force, right, of you. And now if you take it into like a psychological, framework, if you think the ego houses the opponent, right? Like the ego is holding you back from a lot of things. It makes
uh,
you make mistakes or it keeps you small, right? It gives you a lot of bravado when you fail, right? And if you think about like the Icarus story of flying too close to the sun, right? Like
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
some more layers to that, and uh, I don't want to mix too many stories in here, but like the concept of the ego being the opponent, it's the opponent to your true self, right?
Uh,
Your true self, your soul is what actually wants to live and sing and do all the great things, and the ego kind of wants to do the opposite of that. It wants to
yeah,
be validated. It wants to keep you safe, to not die, which people confuse for living all the time, right?
right.
Your true self wants you to live. The ego wants you to not die, right? Those are
Yeah,
not the same thing. They're the opposite, even though they look like the same thing. So
yeah.
that's kind of the whole concept of resistance, whether you call it an evil force like Satan or Hasatan, or
Uh,
capital R resistance as this like evil force that's stopping you. Uh, Whatever you want to call it, like it's there. It's well documented, and it's definitely something that shows up when we start to do things.
yeah. Oh, yeah, no, I like that. Actually, yeah, I didn't know that. Hasatan,
Yeah,
uh, resistance, or the what was it? Your enemy, your opponent.
the opponent is.
Yeah, and that's what I like, that perspective of the ego and what, we typically refer to as the old you,
Mhm.
right? The
Old software.
software, the mental software, the mindset, the psychology, whatever you want to call it, that was programmed in at an early age, that says, this is what I believe in myself. This is what I believe the world is, and these instructions for how to operate, which were pretty much given to us by our parents, right? We primarily operate within that operating system, that mindset, and it is by its nature designed to keep you safe and protect you. And yeah, the ego is a big piece of that because it's deeply, deeply ingrained in our brain, right? Like it's that
Yeah.
reptilian, that brain stem, that ancient part of our brains that's fight or flight, right? And so anything that is can appear scary, which typically, like your soul, if your soul or your higher self or this greatest version of you, it is calling you or has these desires, well, generally it's going to require actions,
Hmm.
right, that are out of your comfort zone, that are scary, right, that there's a lot of fear to, and the ego or the old you steps in to say, wait, hold on a second, are we sure about this?
Hmm.
This is scary. We might.
Even
Yeah,
right now, it's showing up for me as like I'm like, I gotta fact check this. Wait, do I remember that story right? Or well, I can't remember the exact place that this came from, and like I started thinking like, oh, my credibility is gonna be lost, so maybe I should just shut my mouth and not bring up stuff, like
yeah,
even in this moment when I'm like hyper aware of the situation and I know like this information is great information. I know it's valid. I know it
right,
works. And the other thing too is I'm not submitting this for peer review. I'm just sharing my experience and the experience
right,
of my life, which is 100% accurate because it's what happened to me, right? Like this is what I'm
yeah,
learning. I'm not saying that like everyone needs to follow this, but even in this moment, it's like, oh, I'm feeling all this resistance and I'm being stopped, And then of course you choose to push through and all that.
yeah, yeah. I think we all feel it at some level, and I think the important thing is the consciousness as to how it shows up, when it shows up, and then do I have the right tools, or do I know what even the right thought process or operating system would be to move past that resistance, or that old where old you shows up and tries to keep you small, or keep you from taking those actions. That's the name of the game, I think, and everything that we
Yep.
do, with clients, it's like the consciousness around that, because however it shows up, whether it's some external thing or something within ourselves, right? Like, I think it's a mixture of both. The universe has a funny way of giving us things to, I don't know, challenge us, or make us question, maybe, do I want this enough? Or, right, like I think that's again, to go a little more metaphysical, spiritual with this, like how the universe presents things in our lives. Maybe a good example would be, myself for getting sick this last week. Like, well, why? Why then? Why not, you know, a month ago? And in the face of pondering some significant changes that I want for myself, for the business, for, the direction forward, I think there's more meaning to that than just, oh, I caught some virus and my physical body got sick, you know?
Yeah. And I mean, I always like to look at it, take that lens and then view it from an energetic perspective, right? If we're all energy, the body's energy, the universe's energy, everything you interact with is energy.
Mhm.
And like you can feel it. You feel when someone who's in a bad mood walks into a room, right? Like you feel that energy. It's kind of contagious, Same
Yeah.
thing with someone who's super happy, like over the top excited. They walk in the room, you're just like, oh, it changes your mood. You feel the energy. I think a lot of that is the same in terms of, let's say, using you as an example.
Mhm.
I'm on the precipice of a new way forward with my business and where I want to, spend my days and how I want to move my life. Well, I had vacation, I had ski trip, I had all of these other things that were uh, allowing me to not have to face all of the newness, right? They're like these little excuses of,
Yeah, yeah,
oh, it's just kind of delaying it. Like, oh, no, I'm doing this. I'm excited about this.
yeah,
I'll start after my ski trip. I'll start after, trip to Mexico. I'll start, and it's like,
yeah.
and then it's like, oh, now I'm back. I'm finally ready to go. I'm here. And then,
No
oh,
excuses.
no excuses. Okay, I'll give you a quick excuse, right? Like immune system, down regulate,
Yeah,
that type of thing. Or if
yeah,
you are walking around with nervous energy, right? Again, the universe attracts things that match that energy. So
right.
like maybe things that seem crazy random aren't crazy random, and you're bringing that into your experience.
Yeah, for sure. And and to bring it back to the client real quick, like one of the things that we talked about was, and this relates back to resistance in general, I think my question to him was, what about your life? i- what are the implications of when these deals do go through and you do obtain this funding for these business deals, and what does that mean for your life? Well, oftentimes I don't think we're totally conscious of it, and we have more subconscious beliefs about what it'll mean for us and the implications it has on anything, our relationships primarily, right? Like what people think of us, could be even your health, like you gave the example earlier. The person who says they want to be healthy, they want to lose the weight, but now it has implications for something, right? They're, oh, well, now I got to ask that person out at Starbucks. I've got to, or their
Right.
current relationship, like something's going to change. And that's the rogue program, or the critical neural link is what we call it, where it's connected to something that we don't really want, or, our ego, our old self is resistant to, trying to protect us from. So while we consciously might think, yeah, that'd be great. I'm gonna have the money for the business deals. I'm gonna have the health, right? Well, maybe not. If that resistance repeatedly shows up, maybe there's something deeper that you imagine your life after this being more painful
Yeah,
than your
totally.
current situation.
There's two things that pop up for me a lot. So one is one of my core values, the waypoints on my map is freedom, right? And I look at freedom from a lot of different perspectives. One being free to be and free to act, and that's even what I'm talking about with resistance. Like I'm feeling this resistance, so I'm not fully free even in speaking. However, when I think of growing a business and I think of having, a huge book of coaching clients instead of like, a moderate amount, or I think of doing online courses or maybe being able to do speaking engagements and stuff like that sounds like less freedom than what I'm experiencing right now.
Right, right,
I'm
yeah,
like, oh, do I really want to fill up my calendar? It's like, I don't know about that. Like, I'm already complaining about all of the text messages or Facebook comments I have to respond to. And I'm like, I don't have a ton of followers. I don't have a ton of, you know, people who actually are like listening to the stuff I'm putting out there. I do have in the back of my mind, like, if I do get to the place where I want to be and I am affecting people in a positive, impact, because impact's another one of my waypoints, my core values is like, if I'm impacting a lot of people, then maybe my freedom's going to go down and I'm going to be more overwhelmed with responding to comments. Or if I don't respond to the comment, I'm going to feel guilty about it. And then I'm going to
right,
internally struggle with it. So freedom is one of those big underlying programs for me that is holding me. And then the other is
yeah,
money. Like I grew up not super wealthy. Like we were middle class and then my father passed away and he was an electrical engineer. He passed and then we lived off of social security survivor benefits. My
mm,
mom, my sister and me and I was in this neighborhood that we'd moved in early to this town and then all of a sudden big tech came into the town and the town blew up. So I went to public school, but it was a really rich public school because there's a lot of tech there. There's also a lot of
uh-huh,
mafia there too.
right,
Um,
huh,
they all
interesting,
had houses. But that really shaped my like kids are rich assholes. Like that was like my thing. Rich people are, like not nice and they're selfish and they make fun of people or they're bullies.
yeah,
And so based off of that, like I definitely have a financial thermostat that is holding me at this super comfortable level that we are. We live a great life. I mean, everything's awesome. I have everything I want. I really do.
yeah,
And when I see going as big as I'd like to go and making that, that FU money type stuff, like that really scares me. I don't want to be that. I don't want to be that rich person. I don't want my kids
uh-huh,
to be rich, bratty kids. It's like this is something I'm very conscious of.
yeah,
And even though I know that like that doesn't have to be how the story goes, I'm really resistant to that.
yeah. So path forward, and what do we do with that, right? Like, and that's a great consciousness on your part, and seeing some of those like those subconscious programs and the current meanings of old you around those sorts of things. One is you just use the keyword story. You tell a new story, right? Or like you look at again, you have this image of what life will be when you have the things or you break through or whatever you want to call it. You can design that as instead of maybe if the current equation is more painful, right? Here's all the great things that come with it. And also the contingencies, or here's how I deal with the potential half empty consequences of
Mm.
this. It's, to put it in like the business example, because that was actually one thing that did come up too. And the client actually acknowledged this. Well, yeah, will this mean more work for me? Do I even want to do that work? Like what?
Right.
Well, you hire someone or you outsource or you delegate or, how do you deal with now an influx of things that might take away my freedoms, right? And here's how I can still maintain the freedoms that I want. I make a point of go on a vacation once a week or once a year, or
Sounds good.
that's
Yeah.
my current
I
once
like
a
that.
week.
Weekly
Yeah.
vacations.
Yeah, or even just once a week, one day a week, it's you totally disconnect or like there's so many different
Yeah.
ways, right? So many different things you can do to address the equations that are running of like well, when this happens, here's the great things that I want, but here's some of the things that I am avoiding and I don't want to happen. And how do I deal with that? But here's how my life is going to be so much better,
You
right?
bring up a really great point. So, with the whole neuro-linguistic programming, you have your old story, you rewrite the new story,
Hmm.
right? And you energize the new story. What I find a lot of times in this community of self-development, personal development, all of those types of things is we want to discover what's wrong with us, right? We want to get to that. What's the genesis of this?
Hmm.
Because awareness is the key, right? If your awareness is everything, yeah, awareness is step one, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
let's get aware of it, and and admittedly, like as you were talking, like I really look at all the areas of my life where I do stumble, or I do uh, have trouble with. I've identified the issue. I can clearly articulate what the issue is that I'm having, and that I know it's not true, right? So that's
Right.
like the step and thing. So we have awareness one, step two, you start unraveling it. You pull that thread of the story because you realize, no, that's not true. I remember I had a few clients. This was when I was doing predominantly fitness training, 14, 15-year-old kids of really, really wealthy people. And they were awesome, super nice kids, like did great in school. People liked them. They were generous. They were kind. So it's like I see evidence of this. But what I didn't do and what I haven't done enough is fully rewrite what that new story is,
Uh-huh.
right? I have the ideas of what the new story looks like, but it's kind of nebulous. I
Yeah.
haven't
Yeah.
energized it because it's not very clear, right? This is like that
Right.
clearly defined future,
Yeah.
and that's, I think, a very powerful exercise that I'm even going to do after this. So I appreciate, the 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 highlighting of how important the news story is
Yeah.
and how clear it needs to be and how you need to energize that, because I do think the reason beliefs happen or unconscious habits happen is because of your beliefs, right?
Yeah.
If I believe that being rich or being wealthy is not a good thing, or the pain of it, outweighs the pleasure of it, well, then that's subconsciously, that's a belief I've held, and I'm going to automatically do it.
Yeah.
If we want to be automatic in the towards pattern to where we want to go, it needs to be a belief. But
Yes.
in order for it to be a belief, it just can't be like, well, I know that's not true, and I know that this is more true, but I don't have it as a full belief yet.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key.
Absolutely. And it's not just you do it once or you write the story and then you put it in your notebook, tuck it away. It's a consistent thing. Like there's only two ways to wire in a belief system. Repetition, you got to do it over and over and over again, and intensity. You have to feel it. You have to it can't just be these, weightless or just like an affirmation,
Right.
some sentence that there's not much emotional connection to, or a paragraph, right? It's no, it has to be real. It has to, you have to feel it and then do it over and over again. And, if it's not sticking, then occasionally you have to go back to the drawing boards or do that kind of analysis or go back into the awareness phase. What else? What else am I missing? What other equations or programs might be running that I can address? But yeah, can't just have the awareness of, which also in turn kind of keeps us embroiled in that old story because it's like we
Right.
will tell it over and
It,
over again. It's oh
it
yes,
strengthens it.
there's the problem again. But to
Right.
reconnect to
Right.
the new and the path forward, like yeah, it's a daily, right? Like multiple times a day, perhaps,
Hmm.
kind of thing. And as always, this providing me my own good insights and talking this out because you know I think we all wrestle with this, or we experience these moments of, as I describe it, this just kind of like rocking back and forth, like trying to get a car out of a rut, and you just,
Right.
pushing and rocking, and then until you can finally get the momentum to get out of the rut, now you're back on the road. Like that constant forward back. Well, the resistance keeps showing up in various ways, and until I can wire in or connect fully to that new story to exit the rut, then I'll just continue.
Right. No, absolutely. And I mean, that is definitely uh, when you see people having trouble with momentum, a lot of it is, if it's something they actually want to do, right?
Mhm.
There's a different story of like, I want to do this with my life, but it's your ego choosing it, not your true self choosing it. And
Uh-huh.
there's whole nother reason of resistance. But when you know it's the right path, like I know for sure, right? Like unequivocally, this is the path. Doesn't mean I know what it's going to look like in the future or that it's not going to evolve. But right now, there is no other path than the one that I see.
Uh-huh.
When people have that momentum shift, it's a holding on to an old identity, and it's a needing to shed the old identity for the new identity, right?
Yeah,
But what comes with losing an old identity? Losing friends, losing family, losing things that were comfortable, doing things that are unknown. It's all of that comes with it. So I also think we need to be a little bit more gentle with ourselves too,
for sure.
around it, and be like, yeah, it can take time, and
Yeah,
repetition and intensity are a great way to do it. Having clarity of what the new story is and who the new identity is, I think is super important.
absolutely. And one more thing I'll add to that is like it can be useful too to connect to the pain of the current state, or maintaining the status quo, or the this old identity, or not making the change. Like, to use a recent example again with me getting sick, there's always great lessons for me in getting sick, primarily around my health, right? Like, one, I don't want to be there again. Like, it was
Right.
one of the worst week and a half I've had in a while of being sick, if not ever. And yeah, probably not probably, I wasn't doing, the right things to prevent me really from getting there. And it just kind of recenters, it's a good reminder of like, oh yeah, maybe get back to eating better, maybe not having that extra beverage, going to the gym consistently or whatever, running, working out, whatever you like, moving my body. Um, and also, the stress relief or stress management kind of uh, factor of that as well. So one, I don't ever want to go back there. I don't want to have that happen again. It's so painful. I know I'm going to get sick again, but can I make it less frequent? Can I make it not as painful? Can I make, like, and extrapolate that over time? Like, can I go 5 years without getting sick? Can I go 10 years? It's interesting. I was talking with Walter the other day, and I asked him the question, like, can meditation, because we've been talking a lot about that, be used as a tool to both cure or be a remedy for being sick, but also preventative? And long story short, his answer was yes. And he told me about, people, gurus that he worked with, people in that community that he spent years of, Tibetan Buddhist, deep meditate, you know, people that have been practicing for many years. He's like, yeah, I never saw them get sick. It was just like their energy was so intact and strong that it was like a shield for them for everything's energy again, like these lower vibrational, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Not toxins, but intruders to enter our sphere of energy, right? Like, so
And,
again,
and to piggyback on that, like Wim Hof and Joe Dispenza, right? Wim Hof doesn't really call it meditation, it's breathing and breath work.
Right.
Right? But you're sitting there, you're meditating. You're doing deep breathing. Like they've done studies. They did this study with him and like 5 of his students where they injected him with like botulism, and
Uh,
then he sat there doing his breath work and basically flushed it out of his system in 20 minutes.
wow.
Like you can
Crazy.
find the video online. It was at like some, I don't know, like Danish hospital or something like that. They did this research, and then Joe Dispenza talks about. I want to say it's in Becoming Supernatural, but they do these studies where they test their immunoglobulin
Yeah.
response or something to that effect. I can't remember what there's some.
Biological marker for immunity or
Yeah,
something.
that when you have higher levels of those, you're less
Yeah.
susceptible to disease. And they
Yeah.
said
Yeah.
that all the people when they get into that meditative state like produce like 30 to 40% more. I don't count me on that number,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
like a significant amount more
Right.
of this stuff that fights disease than, when they aren't. So absolute, like, yes, energetic, metaphysical, and then here's how it manifests in the physical world, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
yeah, your immune system does go up. I know for a fact that when I started doing more of this personal development, self-development, and changing my language and changing my attitude, I get sick less often. Like
Yeah.
it just doesn't happen as often as it used to.
Interesting. Yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it makes sense. Like the more energy you can preserve and build, right? Like you think of all the depleters of energy throughout our day, like, and we're just in this fast-paced society. It's wake up, you go, 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 you chug coffee, you're at work, you're stressed, you're
right,
like
cortisol
you're
levels increasing.
yeah,
Yeah,
you're depleting energy all day long. What do we do to actually maintain or preserve, but also build our energy back up? So yeah,
yeah,
again, getting sick, good reminder, things I could be doing, am now doing, will continue to
great.
do to yeah, not go back to that again. So well, appreciate it, man. Anything else you want to add to our resistance
No, I mean, we
conversation?
so many paths we can go down, but I think
Yeah,
that's good for one day.
cool, man. Appreciate it as always.
Yeah, you too.